you need to come in and baste a 1/8 inch, about 1/8 inch in from the edge before you can start this binding. And 1/4 of an inch is too much. It's got to be less than probably about 1/8, or maybe even a little bit less than 1/8. I'm using little feed dogs on my, there's a little feed dog foot, and I'm using that as a guide. And what I call this is an inverted mitered corner. Okay, and the only reason for the basting is just because it's in the inside like that. And we're going to have to clip, and so we're best to get that basted in there. All right? So now we're going to take a double edge binding. And I'm just going to start it right here on the end, even though if I was making a quilt, I'd actually be joining that piece. And now we're going to set this up, and we're going to just sew as if we were doing a regular quilt. And I'm going to get my machine. I'm going to get, okay. And I'm going to sew it 1/4 inch. So I'm just putting a binding on my quilt now. And before I get to the corner, I'm going to stop. We're going to take the needle out, and then we're going to fold back at an angle, a 45-degree angle. Then we bring it straight forward, and we start sewing again. This is just a typical binding that everybody does for their quilts. We've been doing this for 20 years, 20 plus years actually, even more than that. Because I've been doing it since back in the early 80s. Okay, so now as I'm going down to the inside corner, the process is a little bit different. What we're going to do is sew to 1/4 of an inch in there. Then I'm going to come back and clip it. And then we're going to do what we call a gooseneck. Sew a little goose in there, and it's going to allow it to fold to the inside. So the very first thing you're going to do, and I'm going to use a black marking pen so that you can actually see what I'm doing. And I'm going to stop, and I'm going to show you. I'm going to stitch down like this. And then 1/4 of an inch in here. So this gives me my 1/4 inch right there. So right at this point I have to stop. All right? So we're going to go back, and we're going to start stitching again. And before, about a 1/2 inch before I get to that point, I'm going to downsize my stitch to about 1.5. And that'll keep my stitches really tight in there so that the threads won't back off underneath it. And I'm going to sew, and I'm going to end right at that black mark that I made. All right? Now I'm going to turn my machine like this, the whole quilt. And we're going to lift up on this, and we're going to fold this back underneath. If I was doing a wedding star, I'd be doing the same thing. So what I'm trying to do is get that quilt folded back underneath the feed dogs at 45, and then I'm going to start sewing straight again. Can you see what I'm doing there? So it's a nice straight seam now. I've folded the fabric underneath the binding there, strip there, and now we're going to just sew. I'm going to tug just a little bit on the quilt at the bottom just to make sure I don't have puckers underneath right at that point where I'm pulling. And I'm going to take a few stitches and go out about a 1/2 inch. Then I'm going to increase my stitch length again and keep sewing. And when I get about halfway in between my two squares, I'm going to stop. And I'm going to pull this out. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back And I'm gonna clip this inside there. I probably should have clipped that first, because it would have been easier to go around the corner. It would have folded back easier for me. There we go. Get that clipped. And I'm going to clip right into that where that seam is. Okay? Now I'm going to take this and I'm going to fold this back just like this and pull this part out to where I have a nice 45-degree angle there. And I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to clip this excess out just a little bit there. Right? Now I'm going to pull the binding out so it looks like this. All right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line and I'm going to show you where I'm going to stitch. And I'm going to do it with a black marker again so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to take this and I'm going to draw a little goose in there. And I'm not going to sew all the way to the edge. I'm going to keep it in about a 1/16 of an inch from the edge of my binding. You can kind of see where that line is. So I'm going to end right in here. And the reason why is because I have all this bulk from the quilt right there. And that's about, from here to here, is about a 1/16 of an inch as well. So now what I'm going to do is bring this over to my machine. I'm going to grab a little piece of paper and I'm going to just start sewing on some paper. And we're probably going to have to change our pressure foot because I have my walking foot on and it's going to be too big for what I'm about to do. We're going to go back to a 1/4 inch foot. All right. I got to move my needle back over to the center. There we go. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to draw on this side. Okay, and that's really what I'm drawing there, is just a 90-degree corner in there. Now I'm going to take this and I'm going to put my needle down, leave my needle down, and I'm going to put my quilt right up next to my needle, and I'm going to stitch that little 90-degree corner in there. And my stitch length should be down to about 1 right now. Right. And now I'm going to stitch out the other way. Okay. Now we're going to remove the paper. The reason for the paper under there is it'll keep it from the machine or the feed dogs eating up these stitches, and you don't want any of these stitches to be wadded up underneath there. All right, so now what we got to do is, I think we're ready. We're going to open this up, and it should look just like that. And it's only sewn to here, and the rest of it's open. Okay, here's a good picture of this side. And then when you open it from the other side, it's going to look just like an inside miter. And now we're going to roll it back on the back side of it. Comes in there just like that. This is not the type of binding that you're going to put on in a half hour. So give yourself 2 or 3 hours to work through this. I use these on my belly wedding star around the inside corners on my scalloped edge. And then you can do these inside squares and stuff, but it's just a perfect mitered, inside mitered corner. And it looks great.